players who can shape the future, right? The big difference really is that everything that human civilization knew in terms of the legal environment, the political environment, the social environment changed dramatically in the last 20 years. And it changed so fast that they didn't have time to put it in your syllabus, right? So in the sense that what would be the most essential part of the curriculum for people like you is unfortunately coming so fast that nobody has the time to change the syllabus and put it in, because the knowledge which you need is just being actually generated. It's not even, there are not even textbooks which can teach you this, right? So what I'll do today is try and set you on a path of your own discovery, where my business or my objective will be to give you certain starting points, but for you to follow up and take it to the extent that you can. And as we say, your mileage will depend on how much research and how much energy and how much ingenuity and hard work you will put in to pursue some of these points. Okay, so let me just get down to the crux of the argument. The argument is very simple. It is that we are in the information age now. We moved from the agricultural age to the industrial age, and now we are in the information age. So in the information age, we have to review all the bases of our political and economic organization that we have taken for granted for the last 300 to 400 years. Okay, so whatever we thought were the bases of organizing society, of organizing commerce, of organizing politics in the last 300 to 400 years needs to be re-examined. And why? Okay, now, those of you who study a bit of political philosophy and the origins of legal jurisprudence as we have today will know that the fundamental idea of the last 300 to 400 years is this idea of individual liberty, right? And the idea that individuals are important, they have liberty, and this comes from a cognitive revolution where suddenly people saw about 500 years ago in Europe that human beings are capable of exercising reason. Okay, so before that, the idea of humans being able to use reason to make decision was not very common, right? But at around 500 years ago, and Reformation, Enlightenment, the historical processes said that okay, human beings are now able to use reason, and because of that, we have to treat them as individuals. And this idea of reason using human beings underpins the norms of society, politics, and economics, right? So, for example, a liberal society recognizes the individual as the unit of society. And from this idea comes the idea of individual liberty, right? Because this person forms the unit of society, so that person has liberty and that person has rights. So the whole jurisprudence of human rights comes from that idea, right? And then people like Hobbes and Rousseau, Hobbes and others said that, look, to protect this liberty, to preserve human rights, you need something called the Leviathan or the state. So you need the state which will take some of your liberties, principally the right to use violence. So the state takes upon itself the monopoly over violence and uses it to give you the other rights, right to life, property rights, etc., that you have. So that's the basic idea of a social contract which came through, right? The state is necessary to protect your rights. So that comes, the first idea that comes from idea of liberty and the individual. The second is that how do you now organize the state? The answer is liberal democracy. And how does liberal democracy work? Liberal democracy is a system where the rights, which we talked about a minute ago, and majority rule are balanced, right? And how do you balance this? By having a democratic republic, where a republic has a constitution and rule of law, and a democracy is a way to interpret the laws and make new laws in the light of the social contract, right? So, it's different from a pure democracy, because in a pure democracy, majority wins. The tyranny of the majority holds. So if 99 people decide that the 100th person should be put to death, so be it. That's a pure democracy. But in a liberal democracy, where there is a constitution or a body of rights, says that, everybody has rights. Whatever, how many ever people agree, you can't put one person to death, right? So the right to life is protected by the constitution. And all other decisions, most other decisions can be made by majority rule. Now, to decide majority rule, there's another interesting thing which comes out, which says franchise, the right to vote. And specifically the idea of universal franchise, right? Where everybody, every citizen, every adult citizen has the right to vote. Now, why is it that we give universal franchise? Again, we go back to reason, because every individual not only has rights, but is capable of reason, right? And reason means that you are able to make a decision weighing the pros and cons, and all the people capable of exercising reason get the right to vote, which is why children don't have the right to vote. Because the assumption here is that, although my children will disagree, the assumption here is that the children are not capable of reason, so they don't get the right to vote, but everybody else gets, right? So reason is again the reason why we give everybody the right to vote. Now the third idea is of market economics. Market economics basically precedes on the idea of economic freedom, voluntary exchange. If I have an object which I want to sell, and you have some money with which you want to buy, then I will willingly sell it to you at a price that I want, and you will buy it at a price that we both mutually agree, right? So that idea of a voluntary exchange forms the idea of trade, of free market economics, right? Why do we say that market machinery is good? Because we believe that this voluntary exchange is done by rational people, right? Because if I have, let's say I have this phone, and I think this phone is worth 50,000 rupees, and you ask me to buy the phone at 40,000 rupees, will I sell it to you? Obviously not, right? Because why would I sell something at 40,000 because this is worth 50,000 rupees? But if you were to come and say, I'll buy it to you for 60,000 rupees, I'll say, yeah, why not? Because this is worth to me 50,000, but you think it's 60,000, so you buy it, right? So the idea of a voluntary exchange, again, is based on my ability to size up the pros and cons, the costs and the benefits of the phone or anything that I make. So if you see these three big edifices, how we run our society, how we run our politics, how we run our economics, is based on this idea, very simple idea, called human beings are able to exercise reason, are capable of using reason. It's all very nice, right? So all up to 1979, 1989, 1999, we started using this. This framework seems to work. At least the assumptions are not challenged. Now, two things happen. The first is people in the field of neuropsychology, behavioral economics, cognitive neuroscience, a lot of these people, based on their ability to understand how human beings make decisions, okay, so based on science, they came to the idea of some conclusions on how the brain works, and therefore, based on that, they figured out how humans might be making decisions. Okay, so the first one is they figured out that people do not always, or even mostly, make decisions weighing pros and cons. The idea that traditional idea that people make decisions, you weigh the pros here and the cons here. You weigh the pros and cons, and then you decide on every issue. That's a classical understanding. And they found that's not generally true. Most people don't weigh pros and cons when they make decisions. And I'm sure you would have seen this when you want to buy a new phone, when you want to buy a new motorcycle, or when you want to go to a movie. You don't, most people don't look at pros and cons. Most people ask around, hey, how's this movie, man? How's this? I'm planning to buy this motorcycle. Do you think I should buy it? So you tend to make your decision based on what your social network or social reference network does. Okay, and this is called social proof. So the idea is that social proof. You make decisions based on social proof, not so much on the pros and cons of it. Okay, so that's one thing which they found out. Now the second thing they found out, and this is very famously in the book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, is that a lot of our decisions are made on instinct. Okay, so within a microsecond, you come to a discussion. Let's say, Anirudh, can you unmute yourself?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question you have to answer. Okay, will you eat dog meat?
No, I am a vegetarian.
Why won't you eat dog meat?
I'm a vegetarian, so
No, but you're vegetarian is why are you a vegetarian?
was imposed on me through
Like, but
family.
have you done everything that is imposed on you? Like, is there everything that imposed on you is still part of your life, or have you changed certain things?
I've changed certain things.
So no, why have you not changed your eating habits?
Um, so when I grew up, also I tried. I wanted to try non-vegetarian, but in the first instance, I felt uncomfortable doing it. So I just
But eating dog meat is a little more than eating non-vegetarian, no?
yeah.
So would you eat dog meat? Let's say you eat non-veg, would you still eat dog meat?
No, not dog meat,
Why?
because dog. So dog is an animal which you won't want to eat. Like it just
Why
doesn't
not?
feel good by instinct. It does not feel good.
Why not?
Just by instinct.
Okay, so I put you in a spot because this is a test which works very nicely. Those of you who observed this conversation would have seen when I asked him about the dog meat, his first answer was very quick. Will you eat dog meat? The answer is no. But when I tried to ask him why he doesn't eat, then the answers became progressively slower until at one point he said it's by instinct, right? So he sort of escaped that thing. Now, but what actually is happening here is that there is a slow brain and there's a fast brain. Okay, the theory is that the slow brain is the rational brain, will weigh the pros and cons, right? And then the fast brain will make the decision. Okay, so that's the theory. But what Kahneman found is the other way around, that the fast brain quickly makes a decision, and then the slow brain tries to rationalize and sort of offer excuses and justifications. And as you guys in the legal fraternity will know, find all sorts of sections and clauses, etc., to justify a decision which you've already decided, right? So that's exactly what's happening in the brain. So, I'm a vegetarian, but I thought about it, and my parents did about it. All of these are just slowly, you're trying to uh, justify that decision, right? And you're not the only one, Anirudh. So all of us are like that. So what this means is that most decisions are made by moral instincts, right? Like, as you said, you never weighed the pros and cons of eating a dog ever in your life, right? You just made it because you're conditioned, because you're a vegetarian family, you're conditioned. So your immediate answer is no, because you're conditioned. It's not because you weighed the pros and cons of dog meat, right? So they found that many decisions are like this. And then related to this is when presented with facts to the contrary, people tend to hunker down. So if I were to tell you that, for example, dog meat has a lot of protein, it has as good, let's say you're a meat eating person, right? And if I were to say that, there's dog meat is as preferable to human beings as chicken or pork or any other kind of meat. And, there's no difference. In fact, it's probably more nutritious, and you're doing the world a service by, reducing the population of stray dogs, etc. What's likely to happen is you're going to just get more and more upset with me, right? You're going to say, look, I don't like these reasons. I don't like these facts. You're going to push back at the facts, and you're going to hunker down and protect your vegetarianism much, much more. Okay. So this is what, again, social psychology, cognitive neuroscience has borne out, right? So when you put all of these things together, you realize that human beings are not as rational as we thought we were, right? And the idea that we are capable of reason, right? There is no doubt about it. We are capable of using reason, but that capability is not used almost all the time. It's you need to try very, very hard to be rational. Most of the time we are operating on other principles. Okay, so keep that thought in your mind. So this is what we know about human decision making. The second thing which happened is that, okay, this was, human beings were like this even in the pre-internet days. Okay, but what happened is, once the internet came into being, once, especially after mobile internet became a reality and everybody had an internet connection in their pockets, right? Sometimes two. So literally, people are highly connected, and we can say that the information age is really here. Almost every human being uh, in urban settings has a phone. I think India's internet penetration is probably close to, real internet penetration is about 60 to 70%, right? So 7 out of 10 people have a phone. So is it around the world, right? So it's not just deeply penetrating Indian society, but it's also 24/7, right? It's deep in the other sense of the word also. Now, what happens is, because of the information age, these processes which we talked about, these cognitive processes about social proof, about instinct-based decision making, about protecting yourself from facts, these just exploded, right? On a scale that we could never ever imagine before. So this has two sets of effects. Okay, the first is what we call cognitive effects. So, for example, you heard of fake news, right? Why do people believe fake news, right? It's this is what is happening because you are in a group of people who want to believe that fake news, and you sort of have a sort of inclination to believe it. So you believe it, and when someone gives you proof against what you believe, you push it back and saying, no, you're wrong. What I believe is right. Okay, so this is what happens. So it's not surprising that so many people around the world believe in the weirdest conspiracy theories, right? It's not that just the uneducated people in a rural area who have not been exposed to the world. It's like the most educated people in the most advanced societies still believe in many cuckoo conspiracy theories, right? The second is the growth of prejudice. Okay, related, because what happens is in every one of us there is a good side and a bad side, right? And the bad side, I would say, has prejudice, has biases, has stereotyping, and we also have the good side, which prevails over these prejudices. Now, what happens is when a large number of people with similar prejudices meet, they're able to express the prejudice a little more. So let's say there are 100 of us with a similar kind of prejudice. If none of us talk about it, that prejudice remains where it is. But let's say I raise my hand and say, I think these NUJS students, I think they are a little too oversmart, man. I think they are a little too oversmart. All I have to say that, these people are a little oversmart. And then everybody around, yeah, NUJS students, I met Anirudh the other day, I met Srija, she was oversmart. I think that's right? And soon, 100 people start believing that NUJS students are oversmart. Okay, so that's how prejudice sort of adds up. Nobody at that point can raise the hand and say, I don't think so, man. I think they are quite normal and they're good people. Whenever somebody raises, then they'll say, no, your facts are wrong. We have seen this, right? So this prejudice also spreads like this. So there is, those of you who are interested can look up this idea of information cascades to see how prejudice spreads, okay? So now that's what happens in the cognitive side. But what happens in the action channel? It's not that people are only influenced by prejudice, right? They can do something about it. For the first time in centuries, ordinary people can do something about their prejudice or their bias. They can act on it, right? And what happens in most cases is this thing of network mobilization, right? Flash mobs. All you need to do is to say, hey, let's meet in front of the police station and protest, right? And you just SMS it or you do WhatsApp to your friends, and people from all over the place can just turn up without any kind of organization required. Right? All you need to do is to send a message saying let's protest in front of the police station, or let's go and beat somebody up. It's all very easy to organize. The second is this process also leads to self-radicalization, because you're in an echo chamber. You only listen to people like yourself, and you become radicalized. And once you become radicalized, you can take action. And now not only can you take that action, you can actually take a video camera and stream that action that you're doing to other people. And other people will look at it and say, wow, this is a great guy. What a hero. He went and protested in front of the police, whatever, right? So this whole channel of mobilized protest can take place. So either as an individual or as a group. What you saw in Washington, D.C. yesterday, for example, is an example of that, right? So now, you're suddenly now in the information age, right? Now, what's happened so far? The story so far is that human beings are not necessarily using reason all the time. Second, in the information age, their ability to use reason becomes much more difficult because of information flows coming from all directions and social proof and all of that. And third, they're able to do certain things in the information age which they couldn't do in the years past. Okay, so now that changes the landscape. Why? Because the idea that by the way, people should have free speech. yeah, people should have free speech, but they seem to be using it in ways that are extremely, extremely detrimental, right? I mean, they're not able to understand that free speech should be used with reason, and you can't be doing, inciting people to violence or spreading rumors or, doing dangerous things which harm other people, right? One. Second, uh, voting. You thought that, people will vote based on what is good for them. It seems to be that most evidence suggests that no, they don't vote based on what is good for them, right? They based on what is hawa and who's likely to win, who your friends are voting, and whole lot of other considerations, maybe including your identity and so on. And then market. Uh, a lot of the market decisions are not any made by voluntary means anymore. I mean, when you sign up to WhatsApp or Facebook or anything, do you know what you signed? I mean, can you say, oh, there's clause number 33 in the WhatsApp terms of use, which I don't agree with. So can you change? No way, right? You have no choice but to accept whatever WhatsApp, Facebook, or anybody is, any app that you download, right? Whatever they say is the terms of use, that's what it is. You have no negotiating power with them. And they are taking data from you. They're taking surveillance data from you. They're doing a whole lot of things which you didn't agree, you didn't agree. Governments are doing a whole lot of things which you didn't agree. So the idea that there is a voluntary exchange is also questionable now. Okay, these three things have all changed. Now that leads to a whole lot of policy implications, right? And let me just spend about 5 minutes just pointing out some big ones, okay? And then the remaining ones we can do in the Q&A. I'm just pointing out about three so that you get a sense of how dramatic the changes are. Okay, the first one is about balancing liberty and security, right? We have the Telegraph Act of 1880. We have many other legislations which were made in the last century for a world which did not have an internet connection in everybody's pocket. And we're in a world now where everybody does. So how do you adapt, right? So privacy and data protection. Who should have the power and accountability of protecting power of privacy and data protection, right? I mean, we even had a long drawn battle in court where the absurd argument that you don't have a right to privacy. I mean, you couldn't believe this until the court had to come and say, yes, right to privacy is a fundamental right. Sometimes the Supreme Court has to come and give kindergarten level advice to people, right? But yeah, that was what was happening. The idea of, similarly, in the idea of balancing liberty and security, what about free speech? How do you contain hate speech? Because hate speech in the pre-internet era was easy to contain. I mean, if this guy was going on to a newspaper, you could tell the editor of the newspaper not to publish it. If this guy was appearing on Doordarshan could refuse to screen this guy. But now this guy has access to multiple social media and he can just spread it. And there's nobody who can stop this hate speech from going around. Now, it can have consequences. It can have real consequences in terms of violence, right? So what about the power and the accountability in this case? Okay. So similarly, in the same liberty and security thing, when you're using Chinese networking equipment, let's say you're using Huawei, right? You can justify buying Huawei equipment on free trade grounds. But what if the Chinese government is spying? What if they are, stealing data from you, right? Who should be accountable for this, right? Who should be accountable for allowing or disallowing Chinese equipment into India, right? So that's one whole basket of issues about balancing liberty and security. The second basket of issues which comes to mind is probably more interesting to you guys is the political power of platforms, because Facebook, WhatsApp, Apple, Google, to an extent Microsoft, have platform power, right? And that platform power can be used, Twitter, for example, not to forget. And that platform power can be used to swing political decisions, right? And even if you don't do it yourself, somebody else can do it, right? Like the whole argument of Russian interference in the US elections. Or, for example, if Facebook tomorrow decides to change its algorithm to favor a particular political party or a politician, It is using political power to swing decisions, right? So how do you now manage the political power of platforms like Facebook and Twitter and so on, right? These are global platforms, especially after they get artificial intelligence and all those other things, which will make it easier for them to say, look, we are not responsible, right? And finally, who makes the rules? That's the last basket of issues. Who should make the rules of the road in the information age? Earlier it used to be the king and the government because they were powerful. And after a while, I suppose the industrial, the economy got into big, rich people could influence decisions. And now everybody can, right? So who should do it? Who's best positioned to make rules of the road for the information age? Should it be the state? Should it be non-state actors? Should it be corporations? Should it be individuals? Which state? Should it be the United States? Should it be China? Should it be us? In what form? Should it be in the United Nations? Should it be new organizations? All of these are up in the air, right? So if you look at the policy issues, all the way from the micro with respect to individual liberty and security, to the commercial, to the political power of platforms, and to the international relations, you still have a whole sort of questions, right? So I will leave it tantalizingly there, and we can discuss more in the Q&A part. But I just want to underline the point which I started my making, is that the information age changes everything. It changes the basis on which we organize our society. It changes, or at least challenges, the basis on which we organize our politics. And it definitely challenges the way we organize our economics.
Thank you, sir, for this fascinating insight into how the very idea of individual liberty has changed due to the coming of the information age, and what will be the policy implications of this. I had a question, and after that I will take questions from the participants. So one of the four kinds of market failures which we commonly talk about is information asymmetry, that in a transaction there can be asymmetry of information. So do you think that with the coming of this information age, the asymmetry between two individuals in a transaction, has it increased or has it decreased?
That's a good question, Anirudh. And I think information asymmetry plays one of the biggest roles in this whole story. Before I answer your question, I'll tell you this, right? So the idea is that you are a rational person, but your ability to make a good decision depends on how much information you have, right? So let's say you're a person who weighs the pros and cons about buying a new motorcycle or buying a new phone. And let's say nobody tells you anything about the features of the phone or the reviews of the people, right? And experiences. You don't know anything, and you just have to make a decision based on just the size and the price. You're not going to be able to make a good decision, right? So the access to information is key to be able to make a rational decision. Now, having said this, there's the obverse is of it also a problem. If you have too much information, again, your mind is not able to process that kind of information and make another decision, right? You can just seize up. If you have too much information, you could say, okay, I can't decide. I'll just go ask my brother, right? And then again, you go back into the non-rational world. So information asymmetry in most transactions is really is a very contextual thing, right? Because you can think of contexts where some people have more information than the others, right? Let's say if you're buying something from e-commerce, right? Let's say you're buying something on e-commerce on Amazon or Flipkart, then the vendors know more about the quality of their products than the buyer. So when you buy, let's say you're buying a water bottle, steel water bottle. So, but the vendor knows the quality of the steel, where it comes from, what's the price, all those stories. The vendor knows it more than you. So when you buy, it's going to be hard for you to make a good decision. But Amazon helps now because of reviews, right? And comments. And now if the reviews and comments are free and fair, and there's no interference or there's no manipulation, then it helps to correct that information asymmetry, right? In the sense that you also know more about the product, and so it helps you. But it can also be in situations where that kind of review process is manipulated, right? Or it's hidden from you, or somebody can say that, look, we won't give you the data. Sorry, we don't give you the data. And then you have to make your own decision, right? So a lot of it depends on the context. So in contexts where information is readily shared and it's transparent, information asymmetry comes down, and the ability to make decisions, better decisions, goes up. But where information is denied to you, or information is manipulated, then it's harder for you to make good decisions.
Thank you, sir. There is a question from Akshat Jain, who asks, do you think that the veracity, it's a related question, it's related to what I had said. Do you think the veracity of public policy has been adversely affected by the ease of access to resources in the information age?
Veracity of public policy has been
adversely affected by the ease of access to resources in the information age.
Well, you can't say it's been adversely affected, but I tell you, if you talk to different kinds of people, nowadays when you go to a doctor, I have many doctor friends, my classmates who are doing medicine, practicing medicine, tell me that, patients come after Googling, right? So they'll have Googled the symptoms. Let's say you have a stomach ache, they would have Googled all the symptoms and come to you. And then they come to the doctor and say, is it appendicitis? Is it kidney stone? Is it this? Is it that? Right? And they just sort of harass the doctor. Right? So the doctors will find it extremely difficult to deal with the situation where the people have just gone in and found all sorts of information on the net, and useful or not useful, they don't know. Okay. So I think a similar story plays out in a lot of public decision making, right? Let's say let's use a concrete example. Let's say there's a flyover being built, right? In the old days, pre-internet days, the flyover being built, some government committee has decided it, some expert committee has filed a report. Based on that flyover is built. You have no idea of any of this, right? Now, some of this information is shared, and you can go and find out, what is the average cost of a flyover, what is the environmental impact, and you can make your own decisions, right? Now, the problem is, a lot of people making these judgments are not really equipped to make those decisions, right? So you might just come to a conclusion based on incomplete understanding of the whole thing, and decide that, oh, there is corruption, right? Or there is environmental damage, or maybe the opposite, that say that all the environmentalists are wrong, or so you might come up with a quasi or an incomplete decision, which might actually make the problem worse, right? So I'm not saying that universally available information is a bad thing or a good thing. What I'm saying is that the ability to use that depends on a lot of other things, right? It depends on whether you're educated enough, whether you have the ability to process that kind of information. Do you know the whole picture, or you are just one thin sliced person who, let's say, if you're an environmentalist, all you can think of is the environment, right? And if you're so unifocused and you get very zealous, you can hold things up, because you don't see the big picture, right? So seeing the big picture is something which is an important skill for citizens to have, but you can't be sure that citizens will have that.
Thank you, sir. Tanish asks, how much of a role do you think that non-governmental bodies play in influencing stakeholders in taking major public policy decisions?
Good one. See, this is a very broad general question, and the answers can range from they are extremely influential to they are not influential at all, right? So it depends on in what domain, in what context, under which government, in what sense of the word, right? So, but the general argument I would make is that they do play a role. They are important stakeholders. Very often, they have more voice than they have power, and very often they tend to run in different directions. And when they run in different directions, they cancel out each other's influence and end up, leaving the government or the decision maker to do very much what he or she pleases, and your outcomes suffer. Okay, so the challenge is not so much whether non-profit organizations, NGOs, have influence or not, But the challenge is how can they find ways to, I wouldn't call it collaborate or cooperate. Not everybody has to collaborate and cooperate, but how do they synthesize their actions in a way that is constructive, right? Because if you all go in all random directions, it just cancels everybody's effort out, and you end up with the suboptimal decision, right?
Sir, so on a related note, there can be two ways in which you can influence public policy decisions. One can be activism, other can be advocacy. So, which do you think has proven more effective in the Indian context? And if you could also speak on Taxshashila's role in influencing policy decisions in India.
See, those are not just only two ways. There are many more ways. It starts from participation. Okay, participation is that as a citizen, you of course have the right to vote, which you should vote. But that's not the only thing. You could put pressure on the government. You could ask questions of government. You can ask questions of your elected representative. In fact, one of the things which citizens ought to do, which they don't do, is visit your MLA, your councillor, or an MP regularly and say, look, these are the issues which are concerning us. We don't want anything from you. Usually citizens go to the MP when I want I want a license, I want a seat for my son or daughter. That's the reason they go to, right? But you could also go to the MP and say, look, we think that clean water is an important part, and we've not been getting it. We think roads should be clean, and various things. So that engagement and participation is the basic thing. And it is something which any and every citizen can do, but very few actually do it, right? And those who do are actually, people motivated with special interests. So it's not surprising that the politician responds to special interest groups, because only the special interest groups are actually lobbying that person, right? You and I are not. So that's number one. The second thing you can do is engage in political and public discourse in your own circles. This is participation in a WhatsApp group or in your informal group, as you're doing right now. There's nothing which stops you from talking about it to your friends, your colleagues who are not part of this group, and educating your friends and others. Now, that can be quite challenging in a WhatsApp group, especially if it's a family WhatsApp group and everybody has their own views. But that is also part of politics, right? You can't be silent, right? Then you have the more organized forms like advocacy and so on. And then there's, of course, participation in direct elections, where you can actually stand for elections, right? You can actually fight an election. I mean, I would encourage each of you to consider that as an option, right? It might be difficult, and you might just, give up and you might lose an election, but don't rule it out, okay? Especially those of you who have the means to be able to sustain yourself and all of that. I would really suggest that you try that, okay? Now, what do we do at Taxshashila? Right? And I would encourage all of you to look at the Taxshashila website and consider participating in our work. See, we start from a very simple idea that transforming India is a marathon. You can't transform India in 3 months or 3 years or 5 years. It takes 10 years, 15 years. If you want to do it in a constitutional way, I mean, if you're a revolutionary, you can do it in whatever way you want. But, those of us who believe in the Constitution and believe that the Constitution is the best way to govern a country like ours, it will take time to change the country. And you have to do it the right way. You can't, if you do the right thing the wrong way, you still get into trouble. And that takes time. And for that, we need the right people to have the right ideas and to be connected to the right opportunities. That's what Taxshashila does. We connect the right people to the right ideas, to the right opportunities. How do we do this? Right? Our main form of engagement is through online, we run online public policy programs. All of you are welcome to participate and take those courses. You can do it alongside your law and other things. You can do it after you graduate. There are short courses which are 3 months long. There are long courses which are a year long. And what we do is we equip you with the essential skills to engage in public policy. As a citizen, as an NGO, as a media person, as a lawyer, as a politician, doesn't matter. It could be from any part of life. It's an essential toolkit for you to engage in public policy in the Indian context. That's the toolkit we give you, right? And once you're part of the alumni network, now we have close to 4,000 alumni. The alumni are everywhere. The alumni are in government, they are in political life, they are in media, they are in various NGOs, corporate lives, and things happen. So once you plug in, so that's what we do, and we believe that the best way to change is through constitution, and for that, as Ambedkar says, even a bad constitution can turn out to be a good one if it's run by good people, right? Ultimately, we want good people to be able to run the constitution.
Thank you, sir. Aditi asks that there was a recent controversy in India on Facebook not acting against political hate speech in India. So what are your views on self-regulation of social media platforms and acting against hate speech?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Aditi. I think it's probably one of the biggest philosophical and legal questions which will be with us for the next 10, 20 years. It's not going to go away. The question has just only started, right? The debate has only started. See, at one level, you can't blame Facebook, right? Because if you're committed to free speech, then you are committed to the free speech of everybody. And what constitutes hate speech or offensive speech is highly contextual. And Facebook can argue that, look, we are not competent to decide. I don't know how to determine whether this is acceptable or unacceptable, right? And when I don't know, it is safer for me not to do anything, because I shouldn't be a biased person. Okay, that is one argument. I think it's reasonable to some extent. But it's also true that in many cases, Facebook has been selective in this, right? I don't think it's been selective based on ideology, but it's been selective based on their corporate interests. Because if you're in a country where the government says that, look, if you don't do as I say, we'll put you in jail, right? Or we will not give you money, we will not advertise with you. Then you're likely to say, okay, let's listen to the government, right? So your commitment to principle and free speech might be secondary to your commitment to your own revenues and profits, right? And I think Facebook, there is a reasonable case to say that Facebook has done this. Now, the broader question really is, to what extent should platforms be responsible for things that are said on their platform, right? So you can make an argument, look, the person who made, let's say there's a murder which happens on the train, okay? To what extent is Indian Railways responsible for that murder, right? Can the railways now be putting a camera in every compartment to see whether there's a murder happening or not? I mean, there's violence happening or not? Let's say they say, but then what about, closed compartment is a private compartment? Do you want a railways camera in your private compartment, right? So you can't, for example, see whether a murder is happening in a railway compartment without putting a camera. And once you put the camera, you're going to spy on everybody's personal life, right? So it's something like that. So Facebook is like the railways, right? Now, to what extent do you want them to be to prevent that murder? Well, one answer to that question is, if those murders are happening a lot, right, on railway compartments, then I think it makes sense to get the railways to be responsible, right, because they can contain it. But if it's not happening that often, then it comes at a different cost. So those are the kind of decisions we'll have to make over the next 5 to 10 years at least, in terms of fixing accountability, responsibility for what happens on platforms. I don't think an extreme solution which says, I consider myself very sympathetic to a libertarian view of life. But even I would say that, the extreme libertarian view that Facebook should not censor anything doesn't hold water, because we have seen violence being perpetrated through Facebook, right, or encouraged through Facebook, and it has taken a lot of lives. So it's not innocent. But at the same time, empowering Facebook with the ability to censor information, or for Facebook to agree for government censorship of information, is also very tricky, right? So we've got to find a way out. I don't think there's an easy answer to this.
Thank you, sir. Uh, Shreyas has asked a question in the context of the statement which was made by Amitabh Kant that India is too much of a democracy. So, vis-a-vis this statement, and in the context of the Farm Bill agitation and the Central Vista controversy, what is your perspective on how to make policies more credible and draw more consensus from the perspective of the government? Is there an information gap or trust deficit? For often we see the Supreme Court playing the role of a final arbiter between the citizens and the government.
Very good question. See, there is a very short answer to this. The short answer is constitutional dharma. If every single entity plays by and large to its constitutional role and sticks to its constitutional limits, we'll be okay. The moment people start straying from their constitutional dharma and either doing unconstitutional or non-constitutional methods or not following the constitution in spirit, we start getting into trouble. So the farmers agitation is a classic example of that, right? I cannot find a single actor in the whole story who has abided by the constitutional dharma. Not a single actor, right? Legislation was not done the way it was supposed to happen. The parliamentary process was cut short. The president did not act. The Supreme Court suddenly decided that it's by its own, some law student made an application and it suddenly intervened in this political dispute all of a sudden. The farmers are blocking roads. I can't think of a single actor in this whole story, regardless of the rights and wrongs of their causes, regardless of the merits of the case. If once you start jumping constitutional steps or avoiding constitutional steps or short-circuiting constitutional steps, you'll end up like this, right? And the more you do it, the more you'll end up. And it's like almost like a pandemic, right? Once you start doing it for one thing, you'll start doing it for other things. And soon you'll be in a very messy constitutional logjam. So as I wrote in a recent article, the issue is not that we have too little democracy or too much democracy. We have too little republic. So the primary duty which all of us have, okay, I sound like an uncle preaching this, but I think it's important and I'm very sincere about this. The primary duty all of us have is to insist on constitutional conduct, to insist that the republic that we have functions according to the way it's supposed to function. Everybody plays by the rules. This includes the people in power, which is the government. This includes the NGOs, it includes the farmers, it includes anybody. There are a lot of people with grievances in the country, and they are genuine grievances. But if everybody decides to pursue their remedies because they have grievances and they just decide to sidestep the constitution, we're going to have chaos in like 30 seconds. So we cannot afford that. The survival of the Indian Republic is therefore extremely, extremely crucial. And we've got to sort of get things back into the constitutional domain. And that happens to be our responsibility and your responsibility as people in the legal community. It's not just what you do, you have to be more articulate in public. You have to go out there and say, look, I sound like an old-fashioned good boy in the class, but I'm not ashamed to say this, but we have to play according to the rules. And the rules are in the Constitution.
Thank you, sir. In fact, I had even read this article of yours after that statement was made. It was published in the print. So the next question is from Saurabh, who says that in light of the Central Vista judgment, how far public participation is being delegitimized under this regime? How far do you think that constitutional principles have influenced public policy making till now in India?
See, the Central Vista thing is a very tricky proposition because I don't think there are legal or constitutional reasons to block it, right? If the Prime Minister decides to stay instead of in Racecourse Road, if the Prime Minister decides to move to a small house near the airport in Delhi, why is it anybody's business, right? It's not a question. There's no impropriety there. If the legitimately elected government believes that they need to build a new capital and that's their priority, well, they have been legitimately elected, right? And maybe they have popular support for that. So I can't find constitutional or matters of right and wrong in this, but it's a question of wisdom. Is it wise to do this? Is it wise to do this now? Now that there is a pandemic, right, and there's economic doldrums, we have challenges of various kinds. Is this the right time to think of, renovating the capital? The other one is it even wise to destroy a democratic heritage, part of our modern history, for this new purpose? Well, I stand on the view. My view is that no, it's not a great idea. You shouldn't be doing it. But I'm a citizen. I'm not in power, right? But the people in power have, I suppose, the right to do this. People can make a representation, but the government ultimately can make its own mind. I'm not a defender of this government. I'm not trying to defend this government. What I'm trying to say is that it's an issue which I don't think we can make a judgment based on the rights and wrongs. It's a question which we can decide on the wisdom or the folly of it. And that's a subjective thing. Ultimately, the executive can do what it's empowered to do.
Thank you, sir. Srijaya has a long question, which I'll try to summarize. That so, in the academia, we see that there are publications coming from identities which are not, in the first place, affected by certain kinds of social issues because of their position of privilege. So let's say an upper caste person writing on the problem of caste in India. So do you think that such publications actually impact the position on the ground, and do they actually represent what these people or these identities have been through in and the prejudices that they have faced?
Okay, so see, this is a very good question, I think, and I'm glad that you all are thinking about it. But I have 3 points to make about this. The first is that as people committed to reason, we should not accept epistemological monopoly, right? In the epistemological monopoly is basically to say that only X person has the wisdom to talk about X, right? We used to see this 20 years ago when we were talking about Islamist terrorism. We would say that, people would say, oh, if you're not a Muslim, you have no business talking about Islamic terrorism or, Islamic jurisprudence, which clearly doesn't hold water. I mean, if you're educated enough, you can comment on it. So similarly, whether it comes to caste or race or gender or any of these things, I don't think we can accept arguments that, you please, you don't have that color of skin, or you're not of that gender, or you're not of that caste, so you should not have any opinion on it. So I think that kind of totalitarianism should be rejected. The second is, in matters of privilege, I think every one of us in this conversation is privileged in one way or the other, right? The question is, what do you do with that privilege? Right? You don't choose your parents, right? So, but you can choose your actions. So if you are, born into a highly privileged family, you could continue preserving your wealth privilege, in your own narrow way, or you could be more socially conscious and try to use your privilege to bring about desirable social change. Nehru, for example, or Gandhi, or any of the people from our founding generation, every one of them was a person of privilege. The people in the Constituent Assembly, every single member of the Constituent Assembly was of some privilege or the other, including Ambedkar, for example. He might have come from a family which is not privileged, but by the time the Constituent Assembly sat, he was already one of the more privileged people in the country. He might have come from a non-privileged family, right? But yet they created a constitution of such lofty standards that we have the consequences of it to see, right? For example, banning untouchability, creating a social revolution. You please read Granville Austin to see how what a wonderful constitution they created. Every one of them was a person of privilege. Okay, so privilege is not about who you are and who you're born to, but what do you do with that privilege? Now, the third part, I think, to answer the question which she asked, is you as a recipient of that information can make the judgment based on what you see as the identity of the speaker. Now, for example, if I have to give a lecture on gender, how easy or difficult it is for women to work in the workforce, right? Let's say you invite me and I give a talk about women in the workforce. How credible I am to talk about women in the workforce can be judged by you, right? I can still, you can't, for example, tell me that, Nitin, you have no right to speak about women in the workforce because you're not a woman, right? I have the right to do it, and you should accept my right to do it. You should even invite me to speak about it. But when you listen to me, you can make your judgment on my content based on what you think is my experience, my identity, versus somebody else, let's say a woman who's going to give you the same kind of a talk on the same subject, right? Because she would have experienced it a lot more than I did. But you again remember, when a lot of this privilege business ignores the fact that a lot of people, even with so-called privilege, undergo life experiences which you just don't know about, right? People could have been, the childhood could have been in very dramatically challenging circumstances. A man, women in the work, for example, a man, for example, might have had a lot of challenges dealing with this issue because of members of his family and on virtue of being a parent, etc. And a woman might not have had those experiences, So just by looking at the gender of that person, you can't make that decision on who's more qualified to talk to, right? But then the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Ultimately, as a person who's listening to this conversation, you can make a judgment. You could decide based on anything that you want. There's nobody is even asking you to, listen to a particular way of doing things.
Yes. Ushmi's question is on the recent anti-conversion laws which have been passed in UP, MP, Himachal Pradesh. With respect to personal liberties and decisional autonomy is challenged, not just for a woman, but the reverse burden of proof also increases the load on the accused person to save himself, because there's an imprisonment provision for 1 to 10 years. So how do you view these laws, and your opinion on this?
I don't think you need long sentences to explain this. It's just absolutely unconstitutional. And I don't understand how such absolutely unconstitutional things are still getting the light of day. And let's be very clear here. The higher judiciary cannot absolve itself of the blame for not standing up for simple constitutional principles. What should be open and shut cases are being given more airtime than they deserve. And in the fullness of time, when we look back at this period in our history, I think the higher judiciary will be held responsible for allowing a lot of these things to take place unchecked.
Thank you. Aditi has another question on intercaste marriages. And you have often said that intercaste marriages are good for the health of Indian society. Still, we are well aware of how unacceptable this idea is among most members of the Indian society. And how can we bring a change in the mindset of the people through public policy?
See, I totally agree with the idea. The idea of the word intercaste seems to privilege the idea that there is caste. I would just put it this way: people should be free to marry whoever they want. That's just it, right? The inter-caste or inter-section or inter-college, those are all artificial divisions. People should have the freedom to marry whoever they want. But this is an issue which cuts against about 2,000 years of social practice in India. Genetic evidence shows that this endogamy within certain communities started taking place about 200 AD onwards. So it's about 1800 years old. And if something is so deeply ingrained in society, to just use only legislation or public policy to change it can be counterproductive, because people can say, we've been doing it this way for the last 1800 years. Your stupid constitution is only 70 years old. why should we listen to your stupid constitution? Right? We'll do it according to the way we've been doing it for 1,800 years. So just shoving the constitution down the throats of families. This is a personal matter, right? It's not it's not a public matter. It's whom you choose. It's a very personal matter. So throwing the constitution down the throats and slamming it on their faces might not necessarily win you. In fact, as I talked about, it might just cause a repulsion. Right? People might react and say, to hell with your constitution, we'll do exactly what we want. So I think there has to be a more social pushing of the envelope, where people, and this was happening. There's been a sort of pushback in the last 15, 20 years. But if I remember the 80s, there was a gradual pushing of the envelope where people were marrying outside community, outside their religion, and there was not too much of a hue and cry. So we've had a sort of a backlash against it in the last 15, 20 years. And I expect that backlash will have another backlash, in the sense that, you can't hold back human emotions, or, people, once they are interacting with each other, people will choose their own life partners. The short answer to that, to your question, is really that I think people should have the courage to choose their life partners and stick with that decision, and persuade, members of their family and their society that this is what they want. And as parents, I think you have to encourage and strengthen your children to make their own decisions. One of the problems I see is that, people are not allowed to make decisions of their own until they're 40 years old. A 40-year-old man will ask his father, what do I do? Right? So you should start acting as an adult by the time you're 18 and choose to lead your own life. There's no other way to do this. Public policy will follow. Public policy will follow once this happens. But I find it much more difficult to, we can easily draw a line and say that, the public policy should help you and do this. But public policy is made by the public, right? And if people dislike something, they'll come up with a act like what you see on UP and MP and try and do things, which has massive popular support.
Thank you, sir. So with this, we have run out of questions from the audience. Before we end, I would like to ask a question on. So you've talked about the problems in society, but now that we have started a new year, what do you think are some of the positive takeaways from 2020? Some lessons that policymakers have learned, and what are the positives that you see in 2021 for India and for the world at large in terms of policy?
See, I think one of the best things we've seen in 2020 is social resilience, right? And despite all the bad news that you see in terms of lack of social harmony, communal tensions, etc., there is also another story where people are helping each other out. So during the lockdown, when people were losing jobs, etc., a lot of people came together to help people with small amounts of money, and so on. So of course, the bad news gets a lot of magnification in the media because, oh, here's this employer who didn't pay his employees, and here's this person who, did some nasty things and so on. But by and large, a lot of people helped in small and big ways in things. And I could observe it in my neighborhood and so on. And this is the reason why I think society is able to hold itself together, right? The second thing you also saw is the ability to bounce back. How quickly the economy could, people were selling masks in the neighborhood of Bangalore I was in 1 or 2 days after the lockdown ended. They were selling masks, they were producing local masks. The whole mask industry came. People were selling hand sanitizers. The ability to do a lot of the things necessary, processes for, taking temperature and social distancing, etc. I think people are capable of a lot of very dynamic adjustments and resilience. And that is a strength which we have, which we should deploy positively in the coming years. That's what I would see. It's the strength of society which shows itself up again and again.
Thank you, sir. With this, we come to the end of the question and answer session. I would now like to ask Tanish to deliver a small vote of thanks.
Yeah, just before that, I just want to share Atish will send a link, share a link. Right after this, we have a political mandala show, which is an online quiz show to discuss where we stand in politics. We are going to launch it at 6:30 today. I want to invite all of you to participate. It's going to be great fun. And it's also something that you can play. It's like Antakshari that you can play with your friends and colleagues after the show also. So you're most welcome. The link will be on the thing in a short while. I think somebody will put it up.
Definitely, sir. I'll share it with all the students of the college. Tanish, is Tanish here?
Yeah, I'm here. Very good evening. On behalf of the informal discussion group NUJS, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to you. We are extremely honored that you graced us with your presence today. It is a privilege for us to have interacted with you, and I'm sure each and every one of us something valuable from this immensely insightful session. I would like to thank you for enlightening us on the realms of liberty and public policy in the information age. I would also like to thank the members of the committee who contributed in making this session a success, members of the faculty and other attendees for their graceful presence and bringing up such wonderful and relevant questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.